Here's this Agile thing with Mike Markey and Matt Beam.
Why don't you go first?
Oh, that's implying that I have something to talk about.
Yeah.
I've had so how about this? How about a general topic around organizations trying to dictate delivery schedules?
All right. Yeah, let's talk about that. Is this the pattern where they make a commitment prior to making sure that the commitment is makeable?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Have you ever encountered such a thing?
Yes, I see it quite frequently. Honestly, it's a situation. Yeah. Well, so what form did that take this week for you?
Well, last week it took the form of a fixed date, fixed scope declaration, which caused a week of mayhem, hand wringing, and consternation from all fronts. And in a sense, they then started trying to figure out what would fit where and what they could jettison, and which you would do, right? Because the iron triangle, you're given 3 variables that dictate the fourth, which is your quality.
What are those 3 variables for the
you've got resources, you got time, and you've got features.
Got it. Resources kind of means people, right?
Yes.
Yes.
But they go with resources because, first of all, it's a PMI thing, and second of all, it's generally considered money, like money equals speech in this regard.
Oh, that's interesting. I hadn't considered that. That probably is, yes, from a budgetary point of view, it makes sense to talk about that in resources. But then we switch it to a different context where we should be maybe more sensitive about the fact that these are not office chairs and things that we lease, they're people. Interesting.
Absolutely. So anyway, the PMI has those 3 constraints, and they say you can fix any 2, and the third one is a variable. And I was dealing with a large contingent of individuals who would say things like, well, we're not doing Agile now because they fixed delivery date and scope. So I'm going to throw that one in your direction. What would you do with that statement?
So they fixed the delivery date. They have to go out at a certain point, and they have to fix scope. So everything has to be, so they can't make it simpler.
Well, they've right. So let's presume that.
Yeah. So what's left to play with? Quality?
No. What is your third?
What's the
third arm of the triangle?
Research. Oh, add more people to it.
Well, and in Agile, we don't add people, right? We don't say an individual is going to make your life better, right? We'll build units of functional delivery in the form of teams.
Right. The team is the basic building block, right?
Yes. So your engine of creation, as it were, made up of people, but viewed as a resource.
Because it's just simpler and easier and less confusing to think about it that way, I guess. I don't know.
So they went into this notion, the day before this announcement was made, we're fixing the date. They thought that they were going to throw 4 teams at this problem. And then after that proclamation was made, they started playing with the only variable they had, trying to figure out how many teams they could throw at the problem. And could we redirect this team from what they're doing now or what they're already scheduled to do this important thing instead? And at one point they got up to 6 teams. And at 6 teams, they started running into coordination issues. Like just the thought of trying to keep 6 teams aligned and moving in the same direction, playing with similar environments, what it would take, because the model that they have established when they were down to 2 teams, and even when they got up to around 4 teams, was, well, we'll just have a senior developer from each of the teams get together to handle the whole merging and adjudicating conflict and all that stuff. But now they got 6 people that have to do that. And the number of interactions has increased, and the amount of time that those senior developers would be spending doing that was pointed out as potentially an issue.
Yeah, and it might not be a linear increase in the
No,
difficult. Yeah,
I'm pretty
yeah,
sure it would be exponential. I'm sure it would, though. The bigger it is, the harder it falls.
yeah. So there's a definite limit to it. Like you can do this to some extent, but be aware that at some point you're going to hit a wall, and it doesn't matter how many people you think you have.
Yeah, and I think back in the day, Scrum would have said, well, you need a scrum of scrums to manage all that stuff, and you can manage that to a certain extent with just a limited number of people or a limited number of teams. And then they hit a certain breaking point, and somebody started coming up with scaling ideas, right? So that hence large scale scrum at scale, uh, the thing that shall not be named. See,
What is
not
that?
going to name it. Not going to name it. Not me.
Moving on. All right,
I'm
moving on.
Yeah.
Okay, cool.
You can name it if you want, but I ain't naming it.
I don't know what you're talking about. Maybe might be safe.
Okay, anyway.
Yep.
So scaling framework of some kind provides guidance as to how to bring all those pieces together and how do you arrange for all this stuff. And there are fixed patterns that people have been putting into place, and some people are finding some level of success in that regard. So here I am pointing out, as everybody's running around with flaming chickens, going like chickens with their heads cut off.
Got
on
it.
fire,
Okay.
right?
Yes.
So all these flaming chickens running around going, what are we to do? Oh, woe is us. And I'm me going, well, it's time to kind of dust off a scaling model and say, let's build, I don't know, how about a team above the fray that will be the host for a scrum of scrums that will also handle all the integrations from the layer below. And they will be responsible for being an escalation path from the teams below, right? They will handle the integration. They will, and they were setting things up so that the teams all had dual environments. They had a development environment and a QA environment. So dev environment, always in motion, always changing, just very malleable, right?
Yeah.
Very, very uncertain,
Messy.
but it's always changing. There's always something going on in there. The QA environment, now that something has reached a stabilized point down in dev, we're going to promote it to QA where we can do a little more, I don't know, call it targeted testing on a stable feature without the rest of the world modifying around it.
Practically speaking, you need that because in the development environment, that's where people make messes in the process of getting. So you need a stable version of that code, just to know if it works. Really, yeah.
So then you get it. So now we're creating this second layer, and they had already, prior to this, some groups within this organization were going straight from QA into production.
Feels risky, maybe.
Which is great from a look how agile we're being because we're releasing frequently to production. But it's no longer as simple as my team as the only player in this area going from our stable QA to a stable production environment where we would rapidly back out if we could. Now we got 6 teams coming together into this fray, and they all have their own independent, way of doing things. They all have their own independent integration problems. Now they're all going to go slam production at the same time. Can't do that, right? That's not gonna. You're never going to play nice in that. Which meant they thought, well, maybe we'll create another environment, like a staging environment at that higher level.
For
and
integration
I jumped in and
all that
said,
stuff.
Yeah. And I said, you should mirror what the teams have. You should treat this like a fractal. Like the teams need a certain number of voices, a certain type of environment. This higher level needs the same stuff. So you need 2 environments. And they're like, no, that's not. I'm like, oh, yeah, you do. So what you'll do is you'll have the one integration layer where all the stuff comes together and gets messy for a while. And then when you stabilize that, you can promote something up to staging. Right? So your second level is now staging over an integration layer, and then you will do releases to production from staging.
Right. And staging
Right.
and production need to be one-to-one.
They
In
need to
fact,
be
this is the
very similar.
blue-green deployment process where either one could be production. You just, the one that's in production now, the blue, let's say the blue is in production. Your green is your staging, and you flip
Yeah,
them.
you could do that if you were the only game in town, but this is not the only game in town. So now you're
Yeah.
talking maybe there's another layer above this layer that would have production above it. So
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. You could do
right.
that. Yep.
So another integration staging layer above that where they take multiple programs coming together. And then anyway,
Totally.
so that's what we were heading for. And then this week happened. And this week, the same people who made the announcement last week that said, this is the date, and then watched everyone explode, came in and said, okay, so you've convinced us that, and thank you for trying, but you convinced us that date is not achievable. So what if we take the date away?
Can we talk about how the date got established in the first place? Because I feel like this is this is not me talking to you, but that's my reaction upon hearing that from leadership.
Well, I'm pretty sure we knew how the date was, there's market pressures that made that be a logical place to aim for.
Totally. I
Right?
guess really a better version of the question is, how did this date get established without roping in all the people who were required to deliver it? Really,
There
that's
you
what I
go.
mean. Yeah,
Right. So, and what made them think they had a shot?
exactly.
Right? So I would say that, so let's get away from this example. Let's go to what would we want to put into place? Because I think that would be more valuable to our audience than to talk about what these people may or may not have achieved. What would we think would be necessary to provide even a cursory thought that, yeah, that date looks vaguely achievable. Let's dig into it deeper and see if we can prove that out.
Yeah. What does that look like? It's probably a conversation. So the pattern that I've heard that works and the one that I've seen that works is to get all of the primary sort of parts of the system. So product, or somebody who understands the business, design, somebody who understands how the thing is actually going to work, and engineering, the people who are actually going to build it, right? Get those people into the same room and say, here's the problem we're trying to solve. Here's what we think the solution looks like. Does everybody agree that that this fulfills the need for the business, that we have a good design that users can actually make use of and find valuable? And does the engineering or architecture group think they can actually deliver it, right? And can the business make money off? Is it worth doing? Is it viable? Like, these are And so you need to talk about that before you write any code at all. Otherwise, you haven't addressed all the risks. And if you find a risk later on, it's much more expensive. It's harder to fix. You want to know as soon as possible.
I would say that some of that stuff probably happened. But let's say that somebody goes out and does some discovery work, figures out what the market need that they want to fulfill is, and they're coming in with that notion. Now they're trying to figure out what they need to actually
build,
change, what makes this into a marketable product.
Yeah.
That can hit a date.
Right.
And what would that look like? What would that date journey look like? Would we and so there's a tendency in a waterfall world to then look at that date as the be all end all. We'll just shove it all out the door on that date because we've gotta, and we're gonna make it because
it makes sense. Yeah, because you think about the human factors inside an organization. Some organizations still have that pattern of the senior, high-paid person sets this stuff and then just communicates it. It tells, there's a small group of people who decide what we're going to do and then just shoves it out to the organization. It's, we're moving from that pattern to, I guess you call it more collaborative, but
right.
Yeah.
You would hope. Now, what we probably had more was that small group of people getting together and doing a cursory thumbnail estimate on things and going, let's call it t-shirt sizes.
Yeah.
Like they looked at a feature and said, small, that's the medium, that one's large, right? And then that had a meaning for them. They
Right.
ended up equating that to a number of sprints, which I think you and I could say that is a reasonable thing to do.
Yeah,
Right?
that's fair.
So you look at it, you lay it out, and you say, if we did this, could we lay this stuff out sprint by sprint, work stream by build multiple work streams, assign work streams to teams? Could it, if they had nothing else to do, could this even fit into the calendar?
Yeah.
Right. And then keep in mind that isn't all that the teams will have to do, but that's a different discussion, right?
Yeah, for sure.
But if they could focus, could we do that? So you will have people who will look at, and you could look at that and say, okay, that's step one. I don't think I would declare an end date based on step one. I might say we have a snowball's chance of achieving this by that date. But I would want to look at it, then I would subdivide that plan and say, but where would our first, call it an MVP? MVP as in first look by our customers to tell us if we're on the right track. Certainly nothing you would ship at that point, right?
So you might not even need to code anything for that in some cases, but you're trying to make sure that the customer finds this valuable and usable in some rudimentary early form, right?
Well, and I would like it to be whatever's in that rudimentary form we approached in vertical slices, and that we've got complete functionality end to end, back end, front end, everything in between, testing, validation, regression all in place. So we've got something, like what's the smallest chunk of something that if we got it out there, we could then say, oh, look, we have something. We created the hub from which all other functionality will flow or something.
Which in practical terms, it means you have a really specific definition of done, right? And it's enough to get it into the wherever the feedback comes from, which means a user's using it, right?
Yeah.
Not just it's in this the integration environment or whatever.
I would be happy if that it made it to staging by that point. Like if we got something into staging that wasn't in production, because even if they put it in production, they'd have to switch it off. Like, so, only certain users could get at it. So I would be happy with the staging environment for that.
Yeah, that's what I mean. To me, the important thing is an actual person who actually pays us money, an actual economic decision maker, actually sees the thing that we actually built and actually tells us what they think. And that could be, public or not. Yeah.
And so the value in doing something like that is that we can get the people who are paying the bill could come in and say, oh, something is happening, which we hope is different from what has happened in the past, where we tried a big bang delivery and, oh, it's not ready. Yeah. Or we're going to shove something that we think is probably ready out the door, and then we're going to be paying the price in defect density and things after that. So let's say we're avoiding that. By declaring an MVP, picking a subset of functionality that says this is our first lookable thing, and we're going to get presentable thing, and we're going to put that out there. And then from that point forward, everything we add is adding to the lookability, right?
Mm-hmm. The product.
Right. So the product grows at that point as a stable thing that continues to live and grow and be usable. It just becomes increasingly more usable.
Yes. So, and just to clarify, there's two definitions of MVP floating around in the industry. One of them is a go, no-go decision, right? Should we build this thing or not? And the second one is the minimum set of functionality for the first version of the product that we already know we're going to ship. And you're describing the second one, it sounds like.
No, I'm actually describing the first look, the first thing that's stable enough that someone could look at. We started referring to the second thing as the MMP, the minimum marketable product.
Perfect. Even better. Okay.
So viable is usable, marketable is sellable.
Yeah. Totally.
Okay. So if we go at it from that direction, so what what I would have hoped is that in the flaming chicken stage,
Yes.
they would have built a plan in which they came to an MVP before the deadline. And then in the next pass, we'll do this much more. And then the next pass, we'll do this much more. And then we think we're going to have enough on the big date that we could push to production, and we know it's working, and we've been validating it all along. And if that were the case, if that structure had been put into place, from that mindset was there from the beginning, then on Monday this week, when the announcement came out, we're going to remove the deadline. What would they have done differently at that point?
Anything? Nothing.
Nothing, right?
Nothing.
The Agile mindset, you and I would have looked at it and said, oh, cool. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, that means we'll get more stuff in by the time your deadline comes along. Now it can go back to product, and product can say, I believe there's enough in there now. We should push it out. And
Right.
maybe even push it out. This is version 1, and now let's do more and do a 1.1 or a 1.2 or 1.3 or something along those lines.
Mm-hmm.
Right. But the decision to remove the date shouldn't have caused a major rethinking, restructuring, replanning. But the first thing that came to everyone's mind was, oh, great, now we have to replan again.
Right. And the reason for that, it sounds like, is because the way that you arrive at a date, the way that you validate that the date makes sense, is by reference to what you've been able to do, and does it meet some criterion, right?
Yeah.
And so,
I mean, if you lay out this rough plan that says in the first sprint we're going to achieve this stuff, and then at the end of the first sprint you say, did we achieve that stuff? And if not, how much did we miss it by? Like, how bad was our thumbnail? Because we got to make up the difference.
Yeah. We might need to make up the difference. It's a product owner question. Like, maybe it's not worth it at that point. This is, so what you're describing, it sounds like, is the sort of constant obsessive focus on value, right? It's to say, okay, we've got a plan. The plan has a date in it. The plan has certain deliverables at certain dates. Let's all wait 5 seconds. And now it's out of date. Now it's obsolete, right? And so you constantly really have to get comfortable thinking about, is the value still there? Is my hypothesis about how to deliver the value still valid given the changes, right? Constantly, all the time. And so, of course, dates can shift. It's really, the date is not the thing that should drive it, I think, maybe, is what we're getting at. It's to say, the customer needs this. Here's when we can get there, right? The date flexes based on our ability to deliver and learn.
And even rewinding to the point when the date was first declared, I don't think we would have been advocates for the flaming chicken scenario either, right? You would have said, okay, well, then we have an end date. Let's figure out what we can get done in that time. Now we go back to product and say, this is all you could get by that date. Yeah. Can you use this? Is this a good, and maybe they rearrange some of the stuff. And if you think about it from this is so hard for most organizations to do, to look at something, especially a thing that's got a time frame that it occurs in, right? Like, you've got things that need to happen over a calendar.
Yeah.
And they design for the whole year.
Right.
And they demand delivery for the whole solution on day one, but they don't need the whole year on day one. They only need some subset, right? Yeah. Maybe the first month, first half a year, something. But there's certain aspects of it that you probably won't see until much later in the calendar year. So that would be a good candidate to get later in the year.
Totally.
Right? For a second release.
Yeah. I mean, I feel like we should also maybe acknowledge that there are some companies that have hard dates, and there are certain points in the market, like companies that have a recurring annual cycle where they've got commitments with clients, and they need to deliver something to be ready for a process that a client goes through every year, for example. And so they do, the idea that there are hard, I don't want to give people the impression that Agile's about, well, we'll figure out what we can get you by the date, and, you get what you get. I mean, Agile's not, there are ways to accommodate hard dates for sure, right? And I think maybe our approach to that would be to understand that that is a hard date. There's a lot of risk associated with missing that date. So anything that you
Mhm.
think is essential, move it up, prioritize it, give yourself as much, basically reduce your risk, manage your risk to say,
Mhm.
don't assume that this is going to take 6 weeks and you can slot it into the end of the year, right? Assume that there's something's going to go wrong. You're going to learn
Right.
something and you might need some extra time. So like anything else, if it takes you 20 minutes to get to work and you have to be to work on time, don't leave 20 minutes before your start time. Put some,
Right.
these are not, so not
You absolutely
difficult.
positively have to get there by a certain time. Well, give yourself time for something to go wrong.
Yep.
So, and so again, Fractal Talk, this concept on a product level or a multiple sprint release uh, applies within a sprint as well, right? We
Mm-hmm.
want the teams to manage the work that they've taken in a similar manner. Start with the most important thing, the most valuable thing. Make sure you've got a plan for getting that done. And if you need to hold off on starting something, make sure it's the less important stuff.
Again, the
And
obsessive
just in
focus on
case.
value, right?
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes what I say to product owners when they're like, I need this and this and this and this and this, and especially if they're in a pattern of overcommitting and not getting stuff done, sprint over sprint. One of the things I'll say to them is to say, so if we put everything in now in planning, some of it's not going to finish, and you're not going to be able to choose what that stuff is. And if you're
Mm-hmm.
okay with that level of randomness in your process, I'm done talking. If you would like to influence what stuff, like if there's something that needs to happen, put that in, and everything that doesn't match that definition, take it out now. Doesn't mean we can't do it. It means we're not going to do it first. And you can pull it
Yeah.
in after the stuff that was crucial is already done. That's the way to manage the risk here, right? But people, there's this really powerful sense that if I don't ask for it now, I can't get it, right? I need to get the stuff in there and make sure. And it's really more of the process we're trying to get to is way more flexible than that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think that a lot of that is the lesson that we need to help them learn is that, it was funny because, that announcement came back and I'm like, oh, cool. Well,
Nothing.
theoretically, you already should be working on the most important thing for you to be working on. So why would this change? Right.
It
That
reveals
doesn't get,
some errors in the
yeah.
thinking. Yeah, totally.
So anyway,
Cool. I think we really got to the bottom of that.
cool. So what one of the things that we mentioned, so if we were to go to a segue to a second topic, we had talked in the past about value and measurement of value.
Not a word. Please go on.
I know, measurement of value.
That's closer.
How is that working in your environments? Are you seeing an approach or a focus on value?
We certainly talk about it quite a bit. I think the difficulty, there's a lot of just sort of the culture, the mindset, the way that senior people think about stuff is it's hard to make that turn, right? And so we're talking a lot about capturing what you call epics and features, like big chunks of work, right? Big scope, big time frames. The approach that I think makes sense is to first, there's somebody, I think it's Simon Sinek, who talks about begin with why, right? Envision the outcome. What is the reason why this is valuable to the organization? How does it help your customers and therefore you? Okay, so get that picture in your mind. Now project yourself 6 months into the future where that's true. What would you measure based on the fact that that's true to confirm that that is been delivered, right?
Yeah.
That's a real hard conversation, right? Because you have to go through, I don't want to say first principles, but like you have to think through from the basics of what is your product, who's buying it, how do they think about it, how does it serve them, what's the problem they're bringing you, because it might not be or sometimes what they'll do is they'll bring you a solution right? It disguises a
Sometimes.
problem. Yeah. So you have to think about, okay, what is the actual problem they're trying to solve? Make sure you understand what the actual thing is as opposed to what they're asking you to do.
Yeah. Your problem becomes providing their solution, not solving their problem.
Yeah. And the risk there is you spend some time and money and deliver the solution that they specified, and they realize that that doesn't actually help them. It doesn't solve the problem. It's on you as the software, the professionals, to be like, well, let me make sure that this actually, does deliver what you're paying for. It's really, it's like if somebody goes to an auto dealership and says, I just give me the fastest car possible, and you realize they don't really. That's dangerous, right? I mean, you could sell them that car. I think that's a little bit unethical. I don't know anything about car dealerships, but like, what's really going to be in the best interest? Are they really going to be happy, and are you going to end up having to clean up some mess that you were part of creating? And so then, so once you have all that stuff, then the question is, what metrics are you going to put in place? Because the organization needs some way to understand if they're making progress. And the metrics should be tied to the value, which means, do the people that are paying you, are they happier? Are they getting the problem solved? And that's, there's all kinds of stuff to talk about in there. Where's the data going to come from? Like, how do we get it? All of this stuff that we've talked about when setting up KPIs and OKRs for clients. It's like, that's hard, right? Especially when you're coming from a pattern where it was relatively easy because somebody just told you, like, this is the plan. This is what you need to do. Here's what you're going to deliver. Here's the date when you're done. It's a complete shift in how you think about understanding the work and creating the plan.
Right. And then, there's a time frame issue, because most of that stuff you're talking about is lagging indicators, right? You have to get something out there before you can see if it moves the needle.
Right.
So if your organization is thinking about projects as opposed to products, right? Projects
100%.
are too short-lived usually to get to a feedback loop, right? This project started, it delivered something. What was the impact of this project? Doesn't matter, project's over.
Oh,
right?
Interesting. Yeah.
Right. Whereas if you look at it from a product mindset, this product lives on. There are projects within that product, right, in which we put out another release of features, functionality, new capability, something along those lines. What has that done? The product itself has to have those KPIs, those metrics, those things you're trying to gain, and the projects should be selected in the hope of them impacting those metrics.
It made sense to me on this end.
Okay, good.
Maybe this, I'm not sure if this is a valid observation, but like we said, in terms of setting up the delivery system, the basic building block is the team. It's not the individual, right?
Mm-hmm.
Similarly here, what was the thought that I just had? What's the corresponding thing when you're measuring value?
That it's a capability. It's not a feature. It's a.
Well, so what I was thinking before is that, like, this really kind of speaks to the technical excellence part of it, right? Because to validate value, to make sure that the customer is really getting something, you need to put the actual thing in front of them. And so that means you need the ability to ship changes frequently. Like, if you're doing it manually and you can only ship to, integration or production or whatever, if you can only do that once a month, right, or once every 3 months or something, you have to wait until then to validate that you are actually creating the value. And so, you're going to be at a disadvantage to know that. You might not know until it's too late if you just don't have the ability to actually move stuff through your system. The technical underpinnings aren't there. If everything's manual and confusing and takes a long time, it's really not possible to know. You have to rely on your hypotheses or your assumptions.
Is it so something you said there actually triggered a thought. If a lot of organizations will struggle with, say, automation, putting automation testing in place, and usually it's a cost discussion, like a cost benefit discussion, like, well, what's it going to cost us to do that? We need to get this done right now. That's going to delay us. It's going to slow us down. is there a value component to automation that could help skew that discussion?
Oh yeah, I think so. We were talking about this a couple of weeks ago in the the four flow items, I think, from the Project to
That's
Product
true.
book.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's, and I can't remember which one, but one of them corresponds to, um, I think it's debt, right? So anything that you need to do to upskill yourself, and so that would be one of those. Absolutely. In fact, I think that's part of Mick Kirsten's message, is to say not only can you do that, but you need to do that, because if you're not balancing what's the most important thing for the organization, then you're not. That is value. That's how you understand value at the organizational level, right?
Mm-hmm.
For many companies, the most valuable thing they can do is to upskill the CI/CD pipeline so that they can get feedback faster, so that they know that they're doing the right thing. And so, but a lot of times what you hear is we're too busy to improve. We have this thing and we know it's the right thing, and we know that the date has to be made, and so therefore we're going to do that, as opposed to improving our ability to ship and to get clarity on that. So yeah, I think you can and you need to think about all of that stuff in terms of value.
Mm-hmm.
It's the sort of the unifying view that brings everybody together to say, look, I don't want to set up these servers either, but it's the most important thing we can do. Right? We can't ship the thing that we think we need to. We don't. The
That's
reality
okay. We
is,
got people for that. We got a group. We ask for hardware and they provide hardware. So we're good. We're good on
yeah.
that.
Well, hopefully that works out. Hopefully it's
Yeah,
a
we're not.
platform team.
Hope,
Yeah.
even if it is, hopefully it's somebody who isn't so overloaded that they can be responsive.
100%. Yeah.
So let's take another tack. Scarcity of people's time.
Yeah.
So there are certain individuals in organizations who are rare and whose expertise is necessary for the execution of work
Yeah.
across multiple work streams, and therefore they cannot be aligned with any one work stream.
Okay.
They have to be aligned with multiple work streams. So they're a shared resource.
Mm-hmm. With the pulse.
Okay.
Yeah.
A shared limited
Flesh and blood.
person,
Yeah. Yeah.
right? Who's being torn in many directions.
Sounds like a
Now,
bottleneck.
I'm gonna suppose for a moment that these people have always been in demand in this organization. They have always been a bottleneck. They've always been pulled in many directions all at once. But nobody knew the extent to which it was happening. And then we come in and say, oh, we're going to build some formal structure around this. We want dedicated people. We've got these teams that are focusing on delivery in a time frame, and therefore they need timely responses from these folks. And it really calls out the multi-dimensional pulling that these people are experiencing.
Exposes it.
And so I always hear and I've heard this in multiple clients where those people start complaining that this agile stuff is causing them to have to do too many meetings, or they're being pulled into too many things. And I'm wondering if it's the agile stuff that's doing it, or is it the organization was always doing it, but now you can see it.
Yeah.
Because there's deadline associated with those interactions.
Yeah. I think you're onto something. There's this idea that Scrum's great at exposing your problems, but it's silent about telling you what to do about them. And so this is a real common pattern we've seen, right? You don't, the organization knows that something's wrong because they're not getting what they need quickly enough, or it's not quality or whatever. So then we start this thing that is based on transparency and quick feedback and
then suddenly everything's transparent and everybody starts freaking out to a certain extent.
Yeah.
Scrum, I always used to say in the Scrum training that Scrum is like your mother-in-law. It's good at pointing out your problems, doesn't necessarily help you fix them. So
Yeah. So I mean, you should, and ideally, you should be grateful for that, right? Because
yeah,
more clarity about your opportunities for improvement are probably a good thing. But people don't like it generally. It's it's not a pleasant experience.
generally no.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think that there's definitely something there. I'm thinking it's a visibility, like, because I've seen it too often, and I'm trying to be sensitive to the fact that yes, I realize you are a limited person with only so many hours in a day, and that everybody is constantly, like, you can't even go through a 15-minute call with these people without them getting a tag from someone else.
Yeah. No, I've definitely seen that. I've seen people that were assigned the role of the chief facilitator, and then didn't have time to come to the big meeting with dozens and dozens of people in it. They had other stuff to do, and it's not a performance discussion. It's not the person's fault. It's really at that level. It's sort of like the idea of the agile system of delivery and the organizational structure are not compatible, right?
Mm-hmm.
The agile system of delivery needs this person's full attention, but the organizational structure hasn't allocated it yet. So I've taken that to the organization. You sometimes you have to kind of bubble up to the level where people can make that change.
Yeah.
But that is, it's not, there's nothing in the framework. It's like if you're gonna plant a garden, right? The garden assumes that you will select the right seeds, you will have soil with nutrients, you will provide water, you won't have animals eating it. If you do all that stuff, you can get the outcome, right? But if you leave any of those inputs out, I mean, that's how it
Yeah.
works, right? So you just got to make it clear to the people who are expecting the outcome that they don't have everything in place.
Yeah. So now they've got these people who are rare and super knowledgeable and need to be in many places at once.
Yeah.
And it's not like you can clone them, right? Because they have a subject matter expertise that has grown over time. How do you create an organization in which these people are able to clone themselves, or at least build expertise that they can delegate to?
It feels like a pairing opportunity, right?
Maybe. But it's not something you're going to flick a switch and get overnight. I mean, you're going to have to evolve away from it, and these people are going to be extremely uncomfortable for a period of time. And it's just, that's, isn't that the complexity of your system or your architecture mirrors your organizational structure?
Some Conway's Law stuff.
Yeah, I think there's a piece of that in there too. Is
Yeah.
the number of directions you pull your architects
And
mirrors
sometimes some of
those
those
structures.
people, they don't, they like being the only person who knows all that stuff. So depending on it might be more difficult.
There probably was a certain amount of job security that went into the achievement of that position, and nobody's in a hurry to get rid of their job security,
Yeah. And it's a hard
despite
sell
the fact that we're always trying to convince them. Right? It's really
it's a hard sell to say, look, for you in this context, if you look at it this way, this is advantageous to you to be able to sort of hoard information or to hoard this. What we're trying to do is grow the overall, like for the person who's in that mindset to hear, well, we want to grow the overall system
Mhm.
capacity. I'm not sure if that's compelling to them. They might need more individualized sort of.
Well, if you are expecting to grow your organization, right, then your structures of support need to grow and scale as well, right?
Yes.
So you as a super intelligent individual will reach a breaking point where you can no longer subdivide your attention.
Yes.
And before that happens, we hope before that happens, you have passed along compartmentalized knowledge to certain individuals who can watch over certain compartments while you can still keep an eye on the compartment of compartments, but they will deal with the, see, See how
Yeah.
scalable that was.
It's fractal.
Yeah, you are the architect of architects. You are, may call it the chief architect
I may.
or something like that.
Yeah.
Is there a C-level architect? Has
I've not
anyone
heard of that.
created a CAO?
I mean, that would probably be CTO, right?
Is it?
I guess. I would expect them to be thinking about architectural abstract stuff at that level. But we just don't use that title. We don't call them
Just
architects.
think about that person's job. It's just to basically sit there and be a giant brain thinking big thoughts.
I mean, the only thing that makes sense is to get more horsepower, right? To be like, because that's the pattern, right? You delegate across all disciplines. It's like you do what you can for some stuff only you can do it, right? And you should do that stuff. But all the stuff that somebody else can do, you should delegate that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and we hope that this we talk about all the time. We're preaching this all the time at the team level, that you guys need to cross train. You need to develop T-shaped skills or comb-shaped skills or whatever metaphor you're looking at these days.
Interesting.
Comb is a recent one I got exposed to.
So there's multiple deep areas of expertise, not just one.
Yeah, not just one.
Fair enough. Combs up. That's a lot of areas of. I mean, how many they can comb? There's like dozens.
Yeah.
Anyway, I get it now.
Yeah. So we always encourage people to do that, to break the silo, to break the individual expertise, to basically make yourself less uniquely necessary, but more broadly necessary.
Less of a bottleneck but more effective, to increase the effectiveness of the people that you are spreading out to.
Yeah. I mean, all these teams always start with their silos of capability. And then you'll run into that argument over, well, I do this. I write code. I run tests. I don't do the other thing.
Incorrect. Right? Incorrect. We need that person's boss in there to define.
Yeah.
You build outcomes.
If the person's boss understands that.
Right.
Totally. If the other person's boss doesn't understand that, now you've got an impediment you've got to deal with.
Totally. I can't remember who. Somebody said, it was at a software company, writing software is not the job. Right. Which is an interesting thing to say at a software company.
Yeah.
This person's point was, again, it's about value and outcomes, right? Your job is to solve the problem. And if you can do that without code, hooray. Mostly you'll be using code, but make that distinction, because otherwise you'll think that this technology is the job.
Yeah. I had an organization I was working with where they had a whole group whose job it was to find alternate solutions than writing code.
Really?
And they viewed it, and they stood at the intake, the opening of the intake funnel, and they took everything and they went, can we find we will spend a sprint researching, it's essentially spiking this thing to see if we can find a better way or an alternate way to do it. And if we fail, then it gets passed on to technology.
So a whole group just dedicated explicitly to exploiting simplicity. Yeah. To trying to eliminate stuff that didn't have to be done to speed. So did you speed up?
Reuse, buy before you build, reuse before you buy before you build.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, something like
that. Repurpose before you re-architect. So did that make you faster? Was there some measurable? I mean, I don't know if there's a before and after period that you could compare, but did that seem to be faster?
I don't know. Yeah. I wasn't privy to that.
Yeah.
But obviously, given that they had limited numbers of technology resources, anything they could deflect from technology was better for getting solutions out the door.
For sure.
Or in the door, depending on what the mechanism of du jour was.
You have to configure your door metaphor first, and then you can transit.
That's right. Is it an innie or an outie? Does this door go both ways? Can we exit and enter?
The truly difficult questions in software. So listen, we are at we didn't have a time box today, but we're at 53 minutes after the hour. Is this a decent place to wrap up?
It could be.
Okay.
I think it's a good place.
I'm going to take that as a yes, and I'm going to go ahead and say
That's the end of this Agile thing.
thank you, everybody, for joining.
Thanks for coming.
See you next time.
See you again soon.